Hey, everybody. Welcome. Hope you're doing well tonight. I'm doing great. It's been a very eventful week for me. I'm I'm super excited that my daughter and son-in-law got moved. My husband and I flew down and then drove back with them to help them drive cars and U-Haul trucks and all those things back. So that was very exciting for us. And so they're all moved, and now we're and trying to settle in while working because they both work remotely, and so, but we have a lot to talk about today, this week, because there's a lot going on in the true crime world. So, welcome everybody who's just joining us. I'm just taking a little time while everybody catches up with us, but howdy and welcome. I don't know about you, but we had the first real cool, rainy fall day, and I wasn't mad about it. I'm definitely a summer girl. I like my summertime, but I can't say I was too mad about it. About having some cooler fall weather. And those of you who follow me on Facebook and on Twitter um, might have noticed that I did a little baking yesterday. I baked bread um, and pumpkin bread as well, pumpkin loaves. And those are recipes that I'll share because they're easy, straightforward recipes. I've shared the boozy pumpkin bread before, and I can share that again. The crusty bread is a rustic artisan style loaf of bread with very little kneading involved, and it turns out lovely. My husband's always excited when he sees that I've got the Dutch oven out and I'm about to make bread in the Dutch oven. So, welcome everybody. It is True Crime Wednesday, and we have a fair amount to talk about. Before we dive into any one of our cases, though, I would like to remind everybody things have been going really great with the book signings and book promotions and the Sun, the British paper, the Sun, their U.S. version just ran an article about the book. It was in People magazine's digital online version a week ago. But the one place where I still need your help is Amazon reviews. What we know is that with 60 Amazon reviews, the Amazon then puts the book into their algorithm and starts pushing it out and recommending it to people who have previously ordered true crime books or expressed some sort of interest in true crime. And we are at 49 reviews. So I need 11 more reviews to hit that magic 60 number. So if you have not yet posted a review, please consider doing that. Take a couple of minutes. It doesn't take a lot. If you would like some sample reviews, email me and I will send them to you because we have some suggestions that you can sort of use as inspiration for your review. So please, please, please do consider posting a review. If you need a little inspiration, drop us an email and I will send those to you. We did provide them to the folks that were in the book launch, on the book launch team that got the early digital version of the book. So please do that. Otherwise, book stuff is going really well. And I'm excited. We've got a couple more events coming up, and I will let you know as we go along if any new events pop up. I Thank you, Jen, for pointing that out. You can review the book on Amazon, even if you didn't buy it on Amazon, although they do um, verify verified purchasers in there. So they do identify people who they have verified are Amazon purchasers. Um, so I do have a couple of things that I'm hoping to set up just to keep everybody in the loop. One of those is the week of Valentine's Day. I'm going to be in the Phoenix area. So my publicist is working on possible book signings in the Phoenix area. If you have a favorite independent bookstore that you would like us to consider, please drop it in the comments or in our email and let us know. Because I'm interested in, I didn't, when I lived in the Phoenix area, it was during COVID. And so I didn't get out and learn the area and learn things as well as I would have liked to. So I'm open to suggestions. So please let me know if you have suggestions on independent bookstores that might be a good fit for a book signing. Before I dive into each of the specific cases that I want to talk about, and I do have updates on several, I wanted to remind everybody of what sort of trials and things we may have coming up. We had in October, we have Boone and Delphi that are both going on now. September, we had Adelson, which was postponed because Donna lost all of her attorneys, her attorney team. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Adelson case. We do have Boone and Delphi going on right now, and we'll be talking about those a little bit later. And then Ashley Benefield is being sentenced on the 22nd, and there is a pretrial conference on the D. Warner case on the 30th of October. November, there isn't anything scheduled right now, and that's not all that surprising because courts generally try not to schedule into the Thanksgiving holiday and then on into Christmas. We do have the James Craig trial starting the 2nd of December of this year. And then in January, we have a couple different things. The Larry Millette trial starts on the 6th, and Karen Reed's retrial starts on the 27th. And I've got more to talk about on Reed and that whole cluster of cases happening around the Boston area. In February, on February 10th, we have Crystal Rogers' case, and on April 28th, Corey Richens. Now, sort of moving on into the year, in June of 2025, we have Brian Koberger. The fall of 25, it's projected that we will get the first of the Rex Heuermann Long Island serial killer cases. And then in October of 2025, we have Shanna Gardner. So let's dive in and talk a bit about the cluster of cases around the Boston area. And there is a military term that some people use that is shortened into shorthand of it's a cluster. And I think both definitions of that word apply in this case. We're talking about within the Boston area, Brian Walsh, Karen Reed, and Sandra Birchmore. Brian Walsh has been accused of murdering his wife, Anna, and her body was never Hi, please let me know if I'm back. I just had an internet glitch. So let me know if I am back. Jen, if you can hear me, wave and let me know. Um, okay, I'm back. Yeah, I know it froze. I had some sort of an internet glitch, so I apologize. Um, as I was saying, uh, as I was saying, Brian Walsh is accused of having murdered his wife, Anna. She disappeared. Her body was never recovered, but evidence of the crime, including tools that were likely used to dismember her body, um, her blood, other indications were that she was the victim of foul play in her home. So Brian Walsh was arrested um, and is awaiting a preliminary hearing. Um, this is an interesting case for a variety of reasons. One is that Judge Canoni is the judge who is hearing Brian Walsh. She also heard and will hear the retrial of Karen Reed. So there's that. One of the things that recently happened was there was a pretrial set and a motion hearing hearing a motion hearing set on the Walsh case. She has rescheduled that for the 2nd of December because the defense is now requesting all of the records from Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor is the Massachusetts state trooper who was the lead law enforcement on both the Walsh case and the Karen Reed case. During the Karen Reed case, it became evident that Michael Proctor was, at a minimum, exercising some pretty poor character and may, in fact, have been manipulating evidence. Those things had led him to be placed on leave without pay and very likely to be terminated with the Massachusetts State Police. So the defense is asking for a complete phone extraction of Michael Proctor's telephone, and they are asking for a complete copy of the 3,000 pages of investigative reports done by the Department of Justice in relation to Michael Proctor. Everybody probably remembers that he was investigated, and it actually was the FBI who did a fair amount of the investigation in the Reed case because they were going behind Michael Proctor and checking his work. So that one is interesting for that because of that. The last one is Sandra Birchmore. Now, Sandra Birchmore's case was a police department near Canton, where Karen Reed's case happened and where the Walsh case is actually, I think the Walsh case is maybe in Boston, but Sandra Birchmore's case was in an adjoining community called Stoughton. And in Stoughton, Massachusetts, the Sandra Birchmore started out as an explorer scout at about 12 years old. With the Stoughton Police Department, she wanted to be a law enforcement agent. And she was involved with several police officers there, including an officer who ultimately was arrested for her murder. It's very clear that she was subjected to inappropriate relationships at a very young age. that would be considered sexual abuse. There, she was sort of, for lack of a better word, passed around several police officers. And at age 23, she was 8 weeks pregnant with her murderer's child. And he strangled her and then made it look like a suicide. I'm certain that those are all things that are going to draw red flags from YouTube. So, but I've given up worrying about whether or not YouTube monetizes me, because that's never been my priority. So, we'll see. But the defense in the Birchmore case has asked for a delay because of the voluminous evidence that's been provided by the state. So there was a pretrial conference coming up, and the state has asked for a delay so that they can get through the discovery. And of course, we have Karen Reed. Karen Reed is accused of backing over her law enforcement boyfriend. He was a Boston police officer, John O'Keefe. There was a trial. At the trial, the jury came back and said they couldn't reach agreement. The judge failed to inquire from the jury whether or not they had reached agreement on any of the counts and declared a mistrial. Later, the jury, members of the jury came out and reported that they, in fact, had reached a verdict on 2 of the 3 charges. So now, Karen Reed's attorneys have filed an appeal asking the appellate court to order that those 2 counts be dismissed out of the retrial. Of course, the state has objected to that. There is a new prosecutor that has come on board, some sort of a more experienced prosecutor. Although the state prosecutor was quick to say that the same prosecutor would remain the lead on the Reed case. So she's currently set for January 27th retrial. Is that carved in stone? Maybe not. A lot of it is going to depend on what happens at the appellate level. And the appeals, all of those appeals and responses have been filed. And so they're now waiting for an oral argument date to be set. It's possible that oral argument date could be set prior to her trial beginning in January. Let's get an update on the Young Thug trial out of Georgia. The Young Thug trial is now officially Georgia's longest running criminal trial. And it is somewhere around day 145 or 146. I wasn't exactly positive. And interesting that since the judge was replaced, the current judge has been pressuring the prosecution to move the case along. The prosecution still has at least 100 witnesses on their witness list to call. So my question is, how does a jury absorb that amount of information? Now they're allowed to take notes, and I'm sure that there are lots of people who are very good at taking notes. But there may be jurors who are not good at taking notes and aren't able to absorb that level of information. So we're talking about 27 co-defendants, 6 of whom are on trial in a joint trial currently in this trial. And 145 days of evidence. Now, the judge was complimentary of the prosecution for calling 9 witnesses in one day, which was the most they'd ever called in one day. In many cases, a single witness spanned several days of trial. You might remember that this is also the case where the prosecution was meeting in chambers with the judge, and the judge ended up being disqualified, but not before he had thrown young thug's lawyer in jail for contempt. And so it has been a very highly contested and difficult case. There have been repeated allegations that the prosecution is sandbagging the defense, that they haven't provided all of the discovery, that they're dropping things at the last minute, that they deny they have, and then, never mind, we found it, sort of thing. Now, there is no question that there is an abundance, that there is, talk about voluminous evidence. There's no question that there's a lot of evidence here. But it's the prosecution's responsibility to assure that that evidence gets cataloged and tracked and turned over. We saw this happen in the Vallow-Daybell case, where the prosecution failed in all of their preparation to actually have a specific person whose job it was to index all of that discovery and to assure that it got turned over. And as a result, Lori Vallow at the last minute didn't face the death penalty because the prosecution had failed to turn over key evidence. So not providing evidence and not providing discovery can have some very serious consequences. As we saw in the Alec Baldwin case, withholding or not providing discovery can result in the case being dismissed with prejudice, as it was with Alec Baldwin. So these are not, you shouldn't take lightly when the defense starts complaining about discovery violations. It's clear that the last judge, I think Glanville was his name, it's clear that he took those allegations very lightly. And as a result, he ended up being, well, not necessarily as a result of that, but he ended up leaving the case and being replaced by a different judge. He was recused because of bias. And that case just is going to continue to drag on. This district attorney, who is the elected DA in Atlanta, Georgia, this is not the first of the firestorm that she has faced. Certainly, she has faced a lot of pushback and blowback for several cases. Young Thug is one of them, but also the prosecution of Donald Trump for voter fraud. So she has come under fire repeatedly and is somewhat beleaguered at this time. Next, let's talk about Donna Adelson very briefly, because there really isn't a whole lot more to tell. As you know, Donna Adelson's entire legal team was found to have a conflict and was required to withdraw. So initially what happened, and I'll just sort of recap this for anybody who missed this, but initially what happened was Dan Rashbaum, who also represented Charlie Adelson at his trial, was representing Donna. And the judge inquired from her, um, do you understand that Mr. Rashbaum has a conflict because he may have been privy to information from your son that could be in conflict with information you give him? She said yes, that she understood that and that she still wanted Rashbaum to be her lawyer. So the other thing is that in order for a conflict to be waivable, it has to be waived by both parties to the conflict. And at that point, Charlie Adelson had verbally said to Dan Rashbaum, "I'm also waiving the conflict." Then Charlie was that was following Charlie's conviction, but then he and his attorneys began pursuing appeals on his conviction. And it's clear that his appellate attorney didn't like the idea of Charlie waiving that conflict. He didn't feel that that was appropriate or in his client's best interest. So waivers like that, conflict waivers like that, are what in the law we call ambulatory. That means they can be changed. So even one of the things that came up was that Dan Rashbaum had never gotten a written waiver from Charlie because they moved him from Florida to North Dakota before Dan could do that. So once he was brought back for the start of Donna Adelson's trial in September, then Dan sent one of his associates over there with the waiver to get Charlie to sign it. And Charlie said, on the advice of my new attorneys, the appellate attorneys, I'm not going to sign this. So either way, he could have withdrawn it even if he had previously signed it, but they didn't have a signed waiver. So Rashbaum had to go back to court and tell the judge, we no longer have a waiver of that conflict. And the judge held a hearing, inquired from both parties about their understanding of the waiver, and indeed found that at that point there was no longer a waiver. And initially, he called Dan Rashbaum's associate into his chambers and questioned him about whether or not there was a Chinese wall. This is another term that lawyers use. It's a conflict term of art. And what the rule says is, for example, if you're in a large firm, and let's say there's 100 lawyers in this firm, and one lawyer is working on a case, and another lawyer then is hired to work with the other side, not on their case, but on other similar cases. And the law firm can say, we're going to create this Chinese wall, like the Great Wall of China. We're going to create this wall between these two lawyers, so nothing that they discuss or process or create within the firm is going to overlap. We're not going to have any overlap in their work on these cases. And in a large firm, that usually works. Now, it does not appear that Dan Rashbaum's firm is all that large, but the judge inquired of the other lawyer, and after that conversation, decided that he had been satisfactorily walled off from the Adelson case. They also said they were going to bring in a third unrelated lawyer who was going to handle the cross-examination of Charlie Adelson, because this all came about because the state has Charlie on their witness list. So a week or so later, the state continued to question whether or not that conflict, whether or not there was still a conflict having to do with the attorneys that were still on the case. And the judge, after further consideration, decided that the entire firm had to be disqualified, including the third party lawyer that they had engaged to do Charlie's Cross. So that left Donna Adelson on the eve of trial, literally on the eve of trial, with no lawyers. So her case has been postponed, and at this point there's been no setting of a new trial date. They're giving her time to find new counsel, and then they're going to have to find out from that new counsel how long it's going to take them to get up to speed and ready to go forward to trial, because she's literally starting from square one. So that is unfortunate, because it has been 10 years since Dan Markel's murder, and it is unfortunate. The state has already defended an allegation that some of the evidence in the case has become stale or is no longer available because it's been such a long time. So it's unfortunate because it's risky for both sides. A quick little note on Alec Murdaugh's case. The civil wrongful death suit that came out of the boat case, Mallory Beach's death, has been settled. Now, do I think Alec Murdaugh had anything to do with that settlement? I don't. I think that it was purely an agreement between his insurance company and possibly the trustees for his estate. So I don't think he had anything to do with it. Robert Tellis, the guy from Nevada, from Las Vegas, who was accused and convicted of killing an investigative journalist who was reporting on his misconduct as an elected official, was sentenced today. He was sentenced to 26 years. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years before he can be considered for parole. So there were a couple of other cases that I wanted to bring up before we dive into Boone and Delphi, and a little bit on Delphi. And one is Dee Warner. Dee Warner's case, you might recall, her husband, her children believe that their stepfather, Dee Warner's husband, had killed her, but her body had never been found. They filed a wrongful death suit and an action with the court to have her declared dead so that they could pursue him civilly because he wasn't being pursued criminally. And then, lo and behold, he was arrested, accused of her murder, and her body was found. So his trial is up for a pretrial conference on October 30th, where I think her family is hoping that the judge will be setting a trial date soon. A lot of you asked me about Lindsay Shyer. She is the Georgia mom who ended up accused of trying to hire someone to murder her at that point estranged husband. Maybe they were already divorced. I'm not sure. And she was arrested in the Bahamas, and so she is facing murder charges in the Bahamas. There has been sort of an interesting development. So Lindsay Shyer was released on $100,000 bail and an ankle monitor and allowed to go to live with her parents in Abbeville, Alabama. And her husband, who was the target in a murder for hire trial but was not injured, currently has custody of their 3 children. So she's living in Alabama on an ankle monitor. She shows up for a pretrial conference in the Bahamas with an ABC camera crew in tow. Now, this probably wouldn't be an issue if she were facing an American trial, but she is facing a Bahamian trial. And the Bahamas legal system is based on English, British common law. And in England and in the Bahamas, it is expressly forbidden to talk to the press prior to trial, because there is a concern that there will be pollution of a jury pool. And remember, the Bahamas is a small country and on an island, and their jury pool is much more condensed and much more difficult to find someone who might not have heard of this case. So she shows up with an ABC film crew. Following the pretrial conference, ABC airs comments that she makes as well as comments of her co-defendants. And the judge is outraged and demands that she come back to the Bahamas on the 24th of October and explain herself, and promptly put in place a very strict gag order. But it's considered contempt of court without a gag order to talk to the press pre-trial. Now, what Lindsay Shyer says is that she entered into a contract with ABC for them to film, with the understanding that those film clips and all of those all of that film footage wouldn't air until after the trial was over. So they said they only agreed to post-trial airing of any footage that was shot by ABC. The judge has said, I want to see the contracts from ABC because I want to know what agreement you entered into with ABC. So the judge wants to review those, and the co-defendants have to appear on the 24th of October. If the judge finds that they, in fact, had contracted with ABC, that their contract with ABC was not limited to post-trial airing, it is likely that she could be returned to Fox Hill. Now, those of you who have heard me explain about the conditions within the Fox Hill prison, you will already know that Fox Hill is one of the worst prisons in the world. It has been rated by Amnesty International as one of the worst prisons in the world. The conditions are squalid. It is rat and vermin infested. In many cases, there's no running water. The sanitation is a bucket in the corner, and there's horrendous living conditions. The only way that you can be assured of safe, healthy food is if your family is providing it for you and delivering it to the prison. It is a far cry from living with her parents in Abbeville, Alabama. And she spent about 12 days in Fox Hill. And before she was released on bail. She initially was allowed to live in a rental or rented like Airbnb in the Bahamas, and then was later, prior to the holidays last year, allowed to go back to the US with an ankle monitor. Um, if she is found guilty, Fox Hill is the only prison in the Bahamas. It houses both men and women, and she would be facing a lengthy sentence in Fox Hill. So, um, so October 24th will be interesting, finding out whether or what the judge is going to do in that case. Her trial is currently scheduled for March of 2025. So let's move on to talk about Delphi. Richard Allen his trial has begun, and they have pretty expeditiously been working on seating a jury. Judge Gull, Francis C. Gull, if you can believe that, is not allowing live stream of any kind, any recording of the proceedings, any sort of transmission of the proceedings. She's not even allowing recordings of the court proceedings, audio recordings of the court proceedings to be distributed the way they did in the Vallow case. She has simply said there will be no cameras. There's no live streaming from court. You can't tweet from court. So it's very difficult to get information out of that trial. Bob Motta from Defense Diaries, Andrea Burkhart from Andrea Burkhart, I think just is her name, podcast, who is also a lawyer, and Lawyer Lee are all attending in person and are sending out reports when they can. So catching up with Delphi is going to be difficult. One thing Bob Motta said is the thing that we have known from the beginning, and that is that the evidence that the prosecution has is pretty darn thin, even without the defense being able to introduce the third party perpetrator evidence, the Odinist theory. Even with that, it seems like the prosecution is going to have a bit of an uphill battle, because the proof that they have is that single spent bullet. Or, I'm sorry, it is not a spent bullet. It is an unfired bullet that was found near Abby and Libby's bodies, and which the state claims was worked through the action of Richard Allen's gun. However, we've talked at length, and if you're at all interested, they're on my website. I did a whole newsletter on junk science, and the tool mark science having to do with unfired bullets is really junk science, and there's a lot of lawyers that are challenging it as not reliable. The reason is because you can at times work a gun, a bullet through a similar gun and get identical markings, because the markings of the gun are the markings on the bullet are based on the manufacturer of the gun. So unlike a fired bullet, if you have a fired bullet, then you have the two pieces. First of all, you have the projectile that comes out of the barrel. And because every time a projectile is fired out of a barrel, it leaves marks on the inside of the barrel as it goes out. Every gun barrel is slightly different and will leave slightly different marks on the projectile. You can also correlate that with the spent casing and the tool marks that are on it as it was worked through the action of the gun. So you have two pieces that you can correlate. And one piece, the projectile, is going to be more persuasive because there's more individuation, I think that's the right word, of a gun as depending on what, how many and of what caliber the projectiles are that are fired. Not caliber because they're always the same caliber, but the type of projectile that's fired. So that's going to leave a different kind of a mark on the projectile. And those can be very much more like fingerprints. But the mechanism that works the bullet through the workings of the gun can bear similarity to other guns of that same make and model. So a lot of defense attorneys have brought challenges against that kind of unspent casing analysis. It appears at this point like the only thing they have is that unspent casing, as well as Richard Allen's jail confessions, which his attorneys are going to say were coerced because of the conditions that he was being held in. And the fact that he made some confessions that were absolutely irrational and made absolutely no sense and in no way matched the actual evidence, it would lead them to be able to argue that Richard Allen was simply trying to tell anybody what they wanted to hear because he was so mentally disabled by his solitary confinement and his medical conditions and all of those other things. So his attorneys are going to argue that those confessions are do not corroborate the little physical evidence they have. The one kind of surprising thing that we heard in the like little mini openings that they do as they're doing jury selection, explaining the case, was we heard from the defense that the prosecution has been quick to discount the fact that there was a hair in one of the girls, clutched in the hand of one of the girls, that does not match Richard Allen. And it has been so far unidentified. And that's important to know because it casts reasonable doubt on whether or not Richard Allen was the perpetrator. Somebody else's hair is clutched in one of the girl's hands. So my understanding is that they are almost done with jury, with voir dire and with jury selection. And it appears that they'll finish tomorrow and that we may get opening statements on Friday. Once again, we're not going to get opening statements because we can't see any of it. None of it's being transmitted in any form. So we're having to rely on people who are in the courtroom, and particularly those who have legal experience, to let us know what's happening. So we'll be watching and listening to Bob Mata from Defense Diaries, Andrea Burkhart, and Andrea has been really very much on the Kohberger case. She lives in Eastern Washington, and practices there, and has been following the Kohberger case very closely, going to those hearings when they were up there in the Moscow area, and also Lawyer Lee. She used to be Harvard Lawyer Lee, but because of some of the issues having to do with Harvard and some of their recent political stands, she has decided to drop the Harvard part and is just now Lawyer Lee. They will all be there, and we will be watching them to get up to date on Delphi. The case that we are able to get live streams on is Sarah Boone. And what we have seen so far is that Sarah Boone's attorneys have been doing their very best with a really tough case, a really difficult client, and a tough set of facts. Her attorneys came on at the 11th hour. They're representing her pro bono, or in a voluntary way, because her attorney said he believed that she was entitled to a defense, and was disenchanted, I guess you'd say, with the fact that the judge had declined to appoint a court-appointed attorney when her 8th court-appointed attorney withdrew, citing irreconcilable differences with Sarah. So, as far as I know, they have picked a jury, and today they were hearing pretrial motions. So the most of what they were hearing was motions in limine. And these motions in limine are important because they're sort of the roadmap for what evidence is going to come in at trial and what is going to be kept out. So in this case, the prosecution was saying, we don't want them to be able to bring up the battered spouse defense, because we believe that Sarah Boone was not is not entitled to raise the battered spouse defense. The reason being that there wasn't a triggering event that caused Sarah to be afraid for her life, and therefore finding it necessary to take George's life. And the arguments were at times a little bit in the weeds and a little esoteric. The judge did a lot of citing to procedural rules. But ultimately, what they were saying, the prosecution was saying, was, we don't want them to be able to bring that up in opening statements. We don't want them to be able to do that, and then for Sarah Boone to either change her story yet again or decide not to testify. The judge said, well, if they bring those things up in opening statements, or they bring those, Sarah decides to give yet another version of her story, that is your opportunity to impeach her. And it is not improper for the prosecution to point out, we're having little freezy glitches here. I'm sorry for that. I haven't had any Wi-Fi problem before, but we are having some little glitches today. It is not improper for the prosecution to point out that Sarah's defense um, promised what they couldn't deliver. And that is not considered burden shifting. It doesn't mean that the burden is shifting from the prosecution to the defense. So it is the prosecution's burden to prove that Sarah Boone did not act in self-defense. Um, Sarah's approach is going to be to say, oh, we were having a good day, but I was triggered because of what happened the day before. And when George got in the suitcase, I and I realized that when he got out, he was going to be angry and he was probably going to hurt me. And so I didn't want him to get out of the suitcase. That definitely is a very different story than the story that she told law enforcement initially. And the prosecution is going to be able to point out that Sarah's story has changed as she's gone along. So um, ultimately, I think the judge denied the prosecution's motions. And I think ultimately that may hurt Sarah because the prosecution is going to be able to point out places where the defense made promises that they didn't deliver on. So that one, I think that's something to look for as we go forward with trial. My understanding is opening statements will start tomorrow. So moving forward, that trial should go forward. And I don't know that that trial is going to take all that long. I think we're talking a week or two before the jury gets that case. So Delphi, they're projecting could be a month. And I don't know at this point what more the prosecution has. They certainly are not telegraphing in any way that they have a lot more evidence than a spent bullet casing and a jailhouse confession after his indictment. So I think their case is thin, even without the Odinist third-party culpability argument. So we will see. So that is my true crime wrap-up for this week. And I think we're kind of ready to take some questions. Hi, Polio. Sarah's motion for snacks today. Did she get approved for that to eat at the trial table? So I do want to address this because I think some people might, because of Sarah and what she's brought on herself by her own personality and her own real sense of entitlement. I think that some people may look at this sort of with a jaundiced eye and say, oh, this is Sarah being Sarah again. But I do want to point out a couple things. Inmates have absolutely no control over their trial days, okay? When an inmate is in the jail, they get 3 meals a day and they have access to their commissary where they can buy snacks if they have money on their books. And so Sarah has been able to supplement whatever it is that she's getting fed by the jail with additional snacks. And now she gets up in the morning quite early. Her attorney said 2 a.m. That seems a little bit draconian to me, but I don't know. But there is a whole process that people who are leaving the jail for the courthouse have to do. And it takes a while. because they have to be searched. They have to be loaded on a van. They have to be searched going into the courthouse. They have to be located in holding cells. And there is a whole process that has to be done in the reverse when they go back to the prison. So what the result of that is that Sarah is getting up early in the morning. It's unclear whether or not she can have breakfast at the prison before they leave. She is probably not being transported back to the prison for her noon meal. She's probably getting a boxed lunch of some kind that the jail is providing her. And then she is returning to the prison and having to do that whole reverse thing. And it appears that she may even be missing the evening meal as well and may be getting nothing but another boxed lunch. So it's not super hard to understand why she might be asking, when the court has a break, can I have a snack? So that doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility or out of the realm of what's reasonable. Additionally, when she is removed from the courtroom, the 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 sheriff's department has specific procedures that they also have to follow. And it may also require that when she is removed from the courtroom, she has to be searched again before she's put in the holding cell. There's a whole protocol, and it varies from courthouse to courthouse and jail to jail, and some are stricter than others. So it's not surprising that she would be saying, when there is a break and the jury is out of the room, can I eat something at the counsel table? I don't think that those are unusual requests. And I don't think, subject to the sheriff being able to assure that she's not receiving contraband in those snacks. The judge adjourned and went to deal with issues of what courtroom jury selection was going to continue the next day, because they had two jurors that were ill, one that tested positive for COVID that they were going to have to replace. So the judge adjourned before a decision was made on that. But I expect that the judge will approve some process where she can have snacks, have a juice box, keep her blood sugar up, whatever it is that, and it may very well be that the sheriff has to hold on to all of those things and provide them to her directly, so that there's no suggestion that there's any introduction of contraband. Those are all reasonable security measures. So, unless the judge came back on the bench later and made that decision, I expect it's something we'll hear about tomorrow. Other questions? Carol Renner, does Bahama Mama get visitation with her kids? My understanding was that she was only having supervised visitation and only for brief periods, but that her parents were allowed to supervise her at their home, but they weren't for extended visits. They were not overnights or anything extended. So I think she has pretty limited access to her children, and rightfully so. If for some reason she is found not guilty, then she can go back to the court and say, I'm not guilty, and I should not be penalized for criminal charges where I was found not guilty. But that's a ways off. And in the meantime, it is reasonable for her former husband to require her to have to have limited time and for it to be supervised. So, good question. Polio. Today I got from Lori the bookmarker, signature plate, and a few stickers. Good. I'm glad you got them. For anyone who has ordered the book, please leave me your mailing address in our emails. I, I will not use it for any other reason other than to address an envelope with a thank you note and a signed book plate and some stickers and my deep thanks. So please, if you would love to have um, a, a signed book plate, just drop us an email at info@thelorivallowstory.com. I so far been keeping up with them. I sent a couple more out today. And so if you emailed me your address, they should be going out in tomorrow's mail. I wrote them today and got them ready. So, N. Oh, cute kitten as your avatar. I'm a sucker for a Siamese cat. Question: have you heard latest developments with Luttrell, one of Delphi's prosecutors? If yes, what are your thoughts on it? I have not heard. I heard that there were some issues with one of the law enforcement officers. And I don't know whether that's Luttrell or not, but I will look into it and I will report back because I had not heard um, anything about that particular. I'm making myself a note. So I will look it up and I'll report back. Rose para jam. Not a real question, but tomorrow is my birthday, and I took a staycation this week to celebrate with uninterrupted trial watching and wedding planning. Thanks for the birthday Eve show. Happy birthday. And let me know if you want a happy birthday book plate. Wonderful. And wedding planning. Having a daughter who got married a year ago in May and has celebrated her first anniversary, I know what wedding planning is all about. It is a delight and a joy, but also there's a lot of stress attached. So be kind to yourself, enjoy your staycation, happy birthday, and happy wedding. What other questions might y'all have for me? We had our first real taste of fall. I mentioned this at the beginning, but probably before a lot of you were on. We had our first real taste of fall in Central Oregon. We had kind of a rainy day. Lots of the trees are changing. There's lots of fall color out there. And as much as I am a summer girl, I didn't hate it. I'm getting a little bit of a taste of fall. Cooler day. It's getting cold at night. We're having overnight lows right around the freezing mark. So literally frost on the pumpkins coming. And I expect that we're going to see some much colder temperatures in the next couple of weeks. Notoriously, it gets very cold, and we have freezing temperatures right around the time of Halloween, and the kids are all forced to bundle up over their costumes. Um, so I I expect we're going to get a real chill coming. Question: why do so many people go to trial when it's obvious they are guilty? Leilani Simon, Sarah Boone, Robert Tellis. Is accountability more shameful than broadcasting the fatal truth? This is a good question. And I think it is particularly significant as it applies to Sarah Boone. because the state offered her a plea, uh, a very a good plea that I'm sure that her lawyers begged her to take. If I were her lawyer, I would have been begging her to take it. It would have resulted with the credit for all the time she's already been in custody. It would and time off for good behavior. It would have resulted in her serving about 4 years. She's looking at 24 if she's convicted. So I think that was incredibly foolish on her part. I think sometimes it is hubris. A lot of these folks are very narcissistic. A lot of them have that sort of narcissistic borderline personality disorder where they believe that they are the victim. The Chad Daybells of the world, the certainly Leilani Simon has been, for all everything we know so far, is that she's sort of claiming she was the victim. Robert Tellis, he's absolutely convinced that he is a victim, that Compass real estate is the true is the true culprit, that he's innocent, that he once again proclaimed his innocence today during his sentencing, that he did not kill Mr. Gurman, and that and so I don't know if it's a sense that accountability is shameful, or if it is a sense that the narcissistic personality disorder just won't allow them to make that admission of guilt. I have to say I was shocked that Sarah Boone didn't. Uh, I guess what I would I wasn't really shocked that Sarah Boone didn't take that deal, but that any defendant didn't take that deal. Certainly, just doing the math, I mean, 4 years versus 24 years should have led any defendant to say, I'll take the plea. Even if I have to do an Alfred plea where I say, I don't want to admit my guilt, but I admit that the prosecutor has enough evidence to convict me. Those, even if you have to do it that way, at least take advantage of that negotiated plea, because you're never going to get a better deal going to trial. But there are people who absolutely, like Robert Tellis, will declare their innocence to the bitter end, and will never ever take a plea. Now, in contrast, we had Chad Dorman, who it was very clear prosecutors had him literally dead to rights. I mean, there was video of him sitting on the front porch with his gun. There were actual direct eyewitnesses to the murders of his three sons. And he took a plea to avoid the death penalty. Wisely so. For someone who did such an irrational act, he was able to rationally say, death penalty versus life sentence, I'm going to opt for life. Chad Daybell was offered that same opportunity and went to trial. So it's always hard to predict. Someone who you would think, like Chad Dorman, what in the heck, that has to be a completely irrational act. His attorneys originally wanted him assessed for a not guilty by reason of insanity plea, and following the reports from those experts, they took a plea. So obviously they believed that the experts were not going to support the idea that he was insane at the time that he committed the crimes, and that at that point their option was either go to trial and risk the death penalty, or convince their client to take a deal. And Dorman was able to do that mental analysis that led him to take a plea. On the other hand, Chad Daybell said, it's all or nothing, and I'm innocent. And if the jury can't see it, then I'll get the death penalty. And in fact, he did. And I think we're at that same place with Robert Hellis and with Sarah Boone. Both of them saying, it's all or nothing. I'm innocent. I'm the victim. And if the jury can't see, the jury is with Sarah, I think, that she absolutely believes that the jury is going to see that she was truly the victim and that she shouldn't be held responsible for George's murder. I don't think the jury is going to go there, and I think she's going to get convicted, and I think she's going to end up with the sentence that she is liable for in that if she's convicted. So, but that's a good question. I think that it has to do with their own mental makeup. Jane Blackbird, not knowing Nevada law, but Tullis's sentence seemed light for someone who lay in wait. Isn't that usually an added element for sentencing? Yes, it was an added element for sentencing, as was the fact that Mr. Gurman was over the age of 60. But even with those enhancements, because let's remember that Mr. Tullis had absolutely no prior criminal history, even with those enhancements, the judge made those sentences consecutive so that he wouldn't be able to parole out until after 26 years. That's my recollection, although I was sort of listening out of one ear. But yeah, it is a light sentence for murder. I would agree, and I think that's just the shape of Nevada law. And I think you would have gotten a very different outcome had you been in Idaho. So, and Jane, if I remember right, you are a lawyer. So, comment. Yes, there's issues with police officer Todd Click on the side of the defense. Seems legit, but timing is odd. Now there's summary judgment from federal civil court for prosecutor Luttrell. Okay, so I'm going to have to dig into that because civil court, a summary judgment from a civil court, not sure how that meshes with the criminal charges. So that made it clear as mud. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more research. I promise that I will report back next week about it because now you've got me really curious. Anyone know how old Tullis is? Seems to me he is mid to late 40s, I would say. Somebody else may know his exact age, but I would say between 45 and 50 would be my guess. I could be wrong. Carol Renner, are all narcissists, psychopaths, murderers then? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not only are not all narcissists murderers, but not all psychopaths are murderers. And psychopaths are people who don't necessarily have a conscience the way that others do. They don't see right and wrong and the way that other people do. But sometimes they are very successful CEOs, and sometimes they are successful politicians because they can emulate what is socially acceptable, even though they don't feel it. So a very, very small percentage of narcissists and or psychopaths actually commit murders. It is a very small percentage. And absolutely not. Narcissists are a dime a dozen, but those who murder are a very small percentage of that. I am not a psychologist, an expert, but after 30 years of listening to expert testimony and dealing with lots of expert witnesses and forensic psychologists, that is my understanding that narcissists and psychopaths who kill are a very small percentage of people who are actually diagnosed with those conditions. Good questions. Roy Clark. Have you heard of Melanie Ferris? She's on trial for killing her husband and then putting him on a burn pit. Yes, I have. I've been watching that trial, although I wasn't sure how many people were watching it, and I have not been watching every day. I've been sort of picking up on updates and seeing snippets, but I haven't been watching every day. So I didn't feel like I was in a position to comment really on the trial. But to be honest, it seems like a fairly straightforward case. He goes missing. It's clear that they have had problems in their marriage for a long time. She's had a couple of affairs. He's had an inappropriate relationship with a coworker. He's filed for divorce. And it's a difficult relationship. He is a successful lawyer who really has all the money, and he turns up dead. They have a hobby farm, and he turns up dead and his remains are burned in this burn pile. Cause of death may have been very difficult to determine, except that they find a gun, a slug, a 38 slug in one of his ribs. And so they're able to determine that likely that he was killed by a gun. And so far, they have been going through a whole sort of litany of circumstantial evidence of their poor relationship, her affairs, her familiarity with guns, and so I it seems like a fairly straightforward circumstantial case. So, good questions. We may have some outcomes later. Ladybug Lady, late to the live. Glad I made some. I will rewatch. Still in recovery from hurricane here in Florida. You know, I was remiss in remembering to mention to lots of folks who I know have been absolutely decimated in their homes and their families because of both Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. I watched that all day. We have family both in Florida and in the Bahamas. So I watched that and was appalled to see the number of tornadoes, powerful tornadoes that were being spawned by the leading edge of Hurricane Milton. And for many people, that was just the added insult to the already injuries that they had sustained thanks to Helene. So I know that Helene was very hard on Greenville and Asheville and North Carolina, and Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I'm tired tonight. Can you tell? Where our friend Gigi from Pretty Lies and Alibis is. She told a harrowing story of having to go and rescue Fruit Loop, her friend, and Fruit Loop and her partner, and a bunch of people from their domestic violence shelter that they run, because it's up in hills and they had to hike out because there were so many trees down. So she reported the eye wall came right over her in Greenville. And I know my daughter has at least one friend that lives in Asheville, and they were flooded and without power for the better part of a week. So it's been rough out there for everybody. I want, please, 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 if you can, donate to any of the relief efforts. Please do that. I don't need super chats. I don't need to be monetized, but they need a lot of help. So please, if you can, donate to the Red Cross or any of the other relief organizations that are providing relief and respite for the folks, because it is going to be a long time to recover. Recovery isn't going to happen in a week or two, and it's certainly our memories and our attention spans are short, and that recovery is going to be long. So please remember them, and remember them in your prayers as well. So, any other questions before we wrap it up and say goodnight? I'm going to be here next week. We're going to be covering Delphi and Sarah Boone. We are going to be able to cover Sarah Boone in detail, because we will have that live stream. Any word on Trisha the trucker traveling in bad weather? You know, we haven't heard from Trisha the trucker. So Trisha, if you're out there, make yourself known and let us know you're safe, because we love you and we want to make sure that you're doing okay. So let yourself be heard. Anybody else that would have a question or a comment before we close? Please, please, please don't forget, if you can, to submit an Amazon review, please, on the book. That means the absolute world to me. We are at 49. We need 11 more before Amazon then puts the book into the algorithm, starts putting it into people's their suggested readings. So it begins, once there's 60 reviews, the algorithm will begin pushing suggestions out to people who previously ordered true crime books or expressed interest in true crime. So it's so important. We've gotten a lot of reviews on Goodreads, which I really appreciate. I can't say enough. We've gotten a lot of nice reviews on Audible as well. A lot of folks really like the narrator who we chose, and I'm glad that you're enjoying it. A lot of folks are enjoying it on Audible. If at all possible, please post a review on Amazon, though, because 11 more reviews are going to mean the world to us. We're up to 51. Thank you, thank you. So we only need 9 more. Please take a minute. If for some reason you're thinking, oh, I'm not a great writer and I don't know what to say, and drop a note in our email and we will send you some inspiration. We'll send you some suggestions. But really, even if it's just as short as a couple of sentences, I like the book, I learned this, I thought our research was good, whatever it is that you think accurately reflects your opinion on the book. It doesn't have to be War and Peace. It can be a couple of sentences, and it will mean the world to me and to promoting the book out there to people who don't know about it yet, and that are true crime fans that don't know about it. So thank you to everybody who has already posted a review. If you would like a book plate, please drop your mailing address into our show, into our email. Don't put it in the show notes. That's public. Send it to me via email and I will send it out. We will not share or reproduce your address for any other reason. But I will drop you a nice thank you note and some stickers and a book plate for the inside of your book. So please do that. With that, I think we're going to say good night. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that there are a lot of other places you could be on a Wednesday night. I know that as fall moves along, you're going to have lots more draws on your time. So I appreciate the fact that you're with us. Join us next week. We'll be doing a roundup of other true crime cases. We certainly will be talking in depth about Sarah Boone and whatever occurs between now and next Wednesday. So with that, I am going to say good night. See you next week.